everything is set up. Thank you very much for your patience. And we can start our side events. For the people that don't know, in the International Peace Corps, we are an office based in Berlin, and the International Peace Corps was founded in 1891. It's therefore one of the world's oldest national peace organizations. And we are a global network of peace and peace-related organizations. We are kind of an umbrella for a lot of different organizations from all over the world. And our mission is achieving peace through disarmament and cooperation. And in fact, I think it was also awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1910. And we have several campaigns, maybe just to mention some of them. One of the most famous is the global campaign against military spending, the GCOMs, and also we are also have a campaign about the common security. And yeah, if you have more questions about our organization, you can ask them also afterwards. You can find us also online. We have our website and all the social media, so you can just follow us for more information. And I think we are now ready to open our event today with the title Europe, Nuclear Sharing and Other Threats. We are very happy to be here with you, and we are also very glad that we have four amazing speakers. Sadly, the fifth one, Lisa Clark, she was going to be with us, but she has an emergency last minute, so she cannot be able to join, but you can see her also on the screen. Was also, yeah, she said that she was very sorry, but maybe we can find a way to, yeah, cover also a little bit her Italian perspective. But yeah, I guess I'm going to start with Ludo, if it's okay. Yeah, Ludo the Brabander. He's a Belgian writer and spokesman for the Belgian organization named Rete. And now, yeah, he's going to open the floor, open the panel, giving us a little bit an overview about the NATO policy and the nuclear arms, and also from a Belgian perspective. Thank you, Ludo, for being with us today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about the situation in Europe and nuclear arms. Well, it's no surprise when I say you the war in Ukraine has brought nuclear weapons issue very much back into the spotlight. Unfortunately, in Europe, there is little positive to state. Danger of nuclear war has been dramatically increased. Russian President Putin has threatened several times weapons. And that's, by the way, one of the important reasons, in my view, why a ceasefire and negotiations are needed. One of them. Russia also has started to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus. So, but the responsibility, this is all we know and we read about often, but the responsibility is also great on the part of NATO. As a result of the withdrawal of the NPT Treaty 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, by former President George Bush, subsequent construction of a missile shield in Poland and Romania and so forth, there is also a huge responsibility on behalf of the nuclear powers belonging to NATO and NATO itself. And it's what I want to focus on as a member of one of these NATO countries, Belgium. So I want to address NATO's nuclear policy and find out why, in my view, it's problematic, even if NATO claims year after year to be committed to arms control and nuclear disarmament. So going back a little bit into the history, it's only gradually nuclear weapons became a central part of NATO's military strategy. In NATO's earliest years, nuclear weapons were even not mentioned in the strategic alliance strategic concept, even when the US nuclear weapons in Europe peaked at more than 7,000. 7,000 there once in Europe, nuclear arms in the 70s on the side of US arms. So nuclear arms were considered as a responsibility of NATO's nuclear powers a long time. And it's only in 2010 at the summit in Lisbon NATO summit in Lisbon, that NATO accepted a strategic concept proclaiming for the first time, or calling for the first time itself, to be a nuclear alliance. So only from 2010. Why is that? From the 50s, US, as I said, began to deploy nuclear weapons in other NATO member states, giving them a role in the planning and preparation of nuclear war with the establishment of the Nuclear Planning Group in 1960. And in the years that followed, all countries, new members included, except France, became involved in the nuclear policy of NATO and the nuclear deterrence policy, which was increasingly defined as a form of alliance, solidarity. And the reason, well, international support among the population for nuclear disarmament grew. Remember the 80s, many hundreds of thousands of people demonstrated in European and US cities opposing new deployments of nuclear arms. And the strengthening of humanitarian and anti-nuclear norms during and after the Cold War played a key role in pushing NATO to adapt. And this led to the collectivization of political responsibility inside NATO for nuclear weapons. And for two reasons. First, the nuclearization of NATO as an organizational identity allowed pro-nuclear actors to justify costly nuclear modernization programs and nuclear deployments as contributions to the alliance solidarity and cohesion. According to ICANN, the reports and facts, there is like 82 billion that is invested in nuclear arms last year, and more than half of them is on the behalf of the NATO countries. Second, the nuclearization of NATO undercut the potential for intra-alliance resistance to nuclear arms. So calls for nuclear disarmament could thus be seen as anti-NATO. So this brings me to nuclear sharing. Nuclear sharing became a core component of NATO's strategy. Of the three nuclear powers in NATO, France, the Kingdom, and the United States, only the last one, the United States, has nuclear arms in other member states. Those are, we all know, Belgium, my country, but also Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. Ones that have been also US nuclear arms, Canada until '84, and Greece until 2001. And the UK until '92, but I think Tom will explain that new deployments are probably planned. Okay. So currently, the US has an estimated, and that it's decreased, strong decrease of nuclear arms in Europe, estimated 100 to 150 tactical B-61 gravity bombs deployed in Europe. And they have to be mounted, not in Turkey, but in the other countries, into dual capable aircraft in wartime. And each year, nuclear sharing is exercised in what they call steadfast noon maneuvers that until recently have been kept secret. There are several legal and political problems with this policies of NATO and sharing policy, nuclear policy. So first, the implementation of the concept of nuclear sharing can be considered as a transfer or control by non-nuclear states of nuclear arms, which would be in breach with Article 1 and 2 of the NPT. The NPT prohibits, as you know, direct or indirect transfer or control of nuclear weapons to non-nuclear states. But according to the US, NPT is not valid. That's the way the argument goes. NPT is not valid anymore in wartime. The purpose of the NPT to avoid war, as it is written in the preamble, is failed at that time. These bombs will soon be replaced or have been already by new B-61-12 bombs. These are new bombs, these are the plans, and we don't know because it's all in secret. And these tactical nuclear weapons are equipped with an electronic tail kit that can guide the bomb to its target. They have also lower yield options, and this is a very dangerous development. The mixture of both precision and lower yield options could be seen by war planners as more useful tactical weapons. And so this new B-61-12 will increase the danger of a war with nuclear weapons and erode the concept itself that NATO has adopted of deterrent. A second problem is that there is no transparency whatsoever around the presence of US nuclear weapons in Europe. This makes the democratic debate and decision-making virtually impossible, which also seems the purpose. For example, I think in all sharing countries, my country, if somebody, a member of parliament, asks a question about the new deployments of these 61 12 bombs, the answer is always, and this is already for years when you ask a question about these weapons, that they cannot deny nor confirm their presence. That's finished. So there is no debate possible, political. Traditionally, according to several surveys, a majority of the population, most NATO countries, favor of a ban on nuclear weapons. It was, according to surveys before the war in Ukraine, but I think still part of the population against weapons. And the secrecy surrounding nuclear sharing is unacceptable in a democracy. The people, I think, in my view, have a right to the truth and must be able to express themselves democratically. The third problem is NATO's quite aggressive stance towards new universal disarmament initiatives and agreements, more in particular the TPNW. At its latest summit in Vilnius, NATO reiterated that the treaty, so the NPT, remains the essential bulwark against the threat of nuclear weapons, claiming its strongest commitment to the full implementation of the NPT across its pillars, including Articles. On the other hand, NATO member states have been boycotting the negotiations on a treaty to ban nuclear arms, although it can be seen as an implementation of the same Article 6 of NPT, which the parties commit to negotiate a treaty for complete nuclear disarmament. So it's ambiguous. Last year's NATO is waging even a real disinformation campaign with a false claim that the ban treaty undermines the nuclear disarmament regime and that it lacks control and verification mechanisms, although in Article 3 of the TPNW clearly states that non-nuclear weapon states shall, and I quote, maintain International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards obligations at a minimum. NATO sees the TPNW as a threat, I think, to its political unity over its nuclear strategy. That's the reason for the strong dismissive language in the Vilnius Declaration, so the last summit, beginning of this month, calling the TPNW in, quote, opposition or inconsistent or incompatible with the alliance with deterrence policy and at odds with existing non-proliferation and disarmament architecture, causing, and that's again quoting, risk undermining the NPT. NATO and the US are clearly frightened by the consequences of the entry into force of the TPNW. Remember how the US have been urging countries to withdraw from the TPNW. And NATO also exerted heavy pressure on member states like my country not to participate at the first meeting of state parties of the TPNW as an observer state. In any case, the reactions and declarations of the US and NATO show that they are concerned about the general impact of the TPNW and the wide support it receives, endangering its political cohesion. Therefore, the Vilnius Declaration emphasizes that talks and negotiations on disarmament should be done with NATO as a platform and, quote, take the prevailing security environment and the security of all allies into account and complement the alliance's deterrence and defense posture. So in other words, NATO members are not supposed to initiate or participate in disarmament initiatives outside NATO or without the leadership of the US. And so the fourth problem with NATO has always been ambiguous, as I already said, in its nuclear policy. It's paying lip service to the NPT while its nuclear powers continue to pour billions into replacing or upgrading their nuclear arsenals. NATO's statements are full of contradictions. According to NATO, and I quote again, nuclear weapons are a core component of NATO's overall capabilities for deterrence and defense, alongside conventional and missile defense forces. NATO is committed to arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, but as long as nuclear weapons exist, it will remain nuclear allies. So it's one time against nuclear weapons, one time supporting nuclear policy, and as long as there is nuclear weapons exist. So This is saying never we will disarm. The language NATO used in the Vilnius Declaration is not such as to invite other nuclear powers like Russia or China to disarm, blaming those countries for the erosion of the disarmament regime while it remains silent of its own role in this erosion, like the deployment of a missile shield after the US pulled out of the ABM treaty, US withdrawal of the INF and the Open Skies Treaty, or the Iran deal, and the future delivery of nuclear submarines to Australia, and so forth. So this is also blaming other countries, but at the same time taking part in the erosion of the disarmament treaty, the general erosion of it, as we have seen it last year. So in other words, NATO is contributing to the escalation of nuclear danger. So finally, I want to say what I think as a peace movement for Europe, we must make what we must do, and it's making efforts for a wide, continue to make efforts, even if it's difficult, but maybe with the film Oppenheimer, it's a wake-up call again for a wide social and political movement on a number of common goals. I have four. First of all, I think the condition should be full transparency must be provided on nuclear weapons in Europe to enable this democratic debate and decision making. I think this is a condition, first condition. And it should be a very normal condition. We are democracy. Secondly, we don't want lip service anymore to disarmament, but concrete initiatives on disarmament leading to negotiations to avert the growing nuclear danger in Europe. This can only be successful if there is a ceasefire in Ukraine and mutual security interests are taken into account. This brings up me to the third issue: no nuclear weapons deployments in Europe, no new nuclear weapon deployments in Europe, and the withdrawal of nuclear weapons from the territories of nuclear sharing countries as a first step towards a nuclear weapon-free zone in Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. Is this possible? I think, of course, possible. It's a matter of political will to negotiate procedure, the time frame, and a verification mechanism for a nuclear weapon zone in Europe. And fourth, legal ban on nuclear weapons and accession to the TPNW by all European countries. This is, I think, the kind of 4 steps that should be taken, that can be taken, and it's only political will that is to happen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ludo, for this introduction. We know that it's difficult, like, to brief and summarize like all the aspect concerned. So thank you. And just for everybody, we are going to open the floor after all questions and comments. So yeah, if you have any, just write them down, and we are going to give the floor after the presentations. And our next speaker is Marion Küpker. I hope she's online and will be able to speak. And Marion represents the Association of Reconciliation Indexes in Abolished Nuclear Weapons group of sponsors. There was about 70 organizations, and so we are very glad that Marion could make a little time to join us today.
She was online, but she's offline now, so perhaps
maybe
we move to the next speaker. Yeah.
We're going to give the floor first to Alain, and then hopefully Marion can join afterwards. So yeah, Alain Rouy is our vice president of the International Bureau, and was elected in October 2022, and he is also a former board member of the IPC, and he's a peace activist representative of the French appeal system. Sorry for my French. Yeah, and now he is part of the Mouvement de la Paix. So thank you, Alain, and he's going to give us more, the perspective from France.
Yes, thank you. I represent the French Mouvement de la Paix, an NGO working in France to ensure that our country plays a positive role in favor of peace. And I want to speak of France. Unfortunately, the French president and government have made the opposite choice. President Macron has aligned with NATO, committed himself to a program of increased military spending, and is thus contributing to the militarization of international relations. In June, the French Parliament passed a military programming law, for the years 2024 to 2030, and this law provides for a 40% increase in military spending compared to the previous law. This means 413 billion euros, including around 60 billion euros for nuclear weapons. Macron has declared, and I quote, "We must never be late for a war, but we must have a war in advance." Macron is leading us into a war economy. On Bastille Day, July 14 in France, the President of the Republic did not address the French people as was tradition. Instead, he addressed the armed forces, expressing his pride at having doubled France's annual defense budget. A few weeks before the Vienna meeting, justified the 60 billion euros for the so-called modernization of nuclear weapons in the name of, I quote, a defense based on a renewed deterrent and investing in major innovation. Then he announced a transformation of the Ministry of the Armed Forces because, and I quote again, the current model stems from a logic that does not always or sufficiently place war at the heart of this organization process, at the heart, war at the heart of our armed forces, preparing us for war, and that is now the objective French policy, preparing war. Regarding Europe, Macron asserted the need for it to be respected, for Europe to be respected. And for several years now, he has wanted Europe to assert its autonomy and strengthen its own military capabilities. What role does he see for France's nuclear weapons? Nothing is ever said on this subject. But this issue of French nuclear sharing has already been debated in the German Bundestag. There is absolutely no transparency in France on these issues, and we have the right to know, but we don't know anything. What about nuclear sharing? It's a thing for other countries, but we are direct implemented with the French nuclear arms. No transparency. That's one of the contradictions of Macron. He wants autonomy, he wants strong Europe, but at the same time, he says that he wants to see a true European pillar within the Atlantic Alliance. Because today, I quote again, we are fortunate to have an American administration on our side. And finally, he affirms that for the decades to come, we Europeans will have to bear the burden of our own security and of conflict with our neighborhood, our neighborhood. it means the French strategic orientations are not always very clear between autonomy and between NATO participation, but they are extremely dangerous because they are all oriented towards war. In our view as the pacifist movement, the announcement of nuclear armament represents a violation of the NPT at a time when the war in Ukraine underlines the urgent need for concrete implementation of the treaty, especially Article 6, which provides for a process of nuclear disarmament. As a nuclear power, France also has a responsibility to make a concrete commitment to such a process, to put forward proposals and initiatives to this end. This is what we are asking of the French diplomats present here in Vienna, on what we expect from the French government is the French initiative for disarmament. In particular, we want France to take into account the entry into force of the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, NPT, instead of fighting, because actually the French diplomacy is fighting against NPT. I didn't hear the French diplomat today. I think it was later, and I am waiting for works. Because we think that the NPT, the NW complements the NPT and enables concrete progress towards the goal of nuclear disarmament. As the representative of Kiribati and Kazakhstan informed, we call on France to participate as an observer at the next meeting of the State Party in New York in November, December, and to work towards signing and ratifying. We, the French pacifists, we are convinced that our country could play a positive role on the international level. To do so, it needs to break away from NATO policy, and to reconsider its doctrine on nuclear weapons. France must once again become an independent voice. When Macron says he wants to be independent, we say yes, but we want a voice in the service of peace and disarmament, and we believe that this would be the best way to increase the influence of France in the world. To achieve this, it's essential to convince and to involve public opinion in our country. That's what we do at the Mouvement de la Paix in France, and we do it with our friends of the other pacifist forces in Europe and in the world, and for my body.
Thank you very much, Alain. I think you were very clear. Don't worry about the English. Yeah. Oh, okay. Marion is also online. That's great. Can you hear us, Marion? I'm going to introduce you again. Yeah, is that good? Okay. Yeah, so I said Marion and Küpker, she's from Germany, and she represents the Association of Reconstruction Indexes and Abolish Nuclear Weapons Group. So thank you, Marion, very much for being with us today. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for introducing me. I hope you can hear me clearly because I couldn't hear you so well when you were speaking. Is it fine or not?
Yeah, we can hear you good, yeah.
Ah, that's good, okay. So I want to talk about nuclear sharing in Germany and our German-wide campaign to oust US nuclear weapons in Germany. So we are having a network of 75 peace organizations and groups in Germany since 30 years now. And since then, we are doing actions at the military base in Germany, where we have about 20 US nuclear weapons, same situation. I guess you already heard, like in Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, and maybe even in Turkey. And yeah, this is part of nuclear sharing. And right now, the situation is that our government is just spending 1.2 billion euro for infrastructure for new planes and the new B-61-12 bombs, because they want to replace the old ones. And the new planes are 35 F-35 planes from, yeah, being bought in the US. And so because of that, we decided in our German-wide campaign that we actually change our goals right now. We also have a clear demand for Europe without nuclear weapons, which means that they have to go. What I wanted to share with you is that over the last 26 years, we had peace activists. They were going onto the base. They were doing civil disobedience, go-in actions, actually, because they wanted to get the legal question into the courts. And because nuclear sharing is actually illegal under Article 1 and 2, the transfer of nuclear weapons, Article 1 and 2 for the NPT, because the transfer of US nuclear weapons, or of nuclear weapons from a nuclear weapon state to a state which has no nuclear weapons is not allowed. And it's the other way around for a non-nuclear state to receiving it. It's also illegal. And so we wanted our courts to, because international laws is higher, is above our German laws, to listen to our expert witnesses, our international law experts, to realize and to judge about it, that this is illegal and they have to disappear. But so far we experienced that 19 people who did these actions, they had their legal rights being denied because their expert witnesses were denied to speak to the court. And when we finally complained, all 19 of us, to the Constitutional Court avoided to deal with this problem by just rejecting to look at our issue. And so because of that, right now we are having 4 people who have a complaint at the European Court on human rights in Strasbourg, because yeah, we feel our life is threatened by this illegal activities, and also because of our rights being mistreated. And in September, there are going to be another additional activists who are also at the European Court. So we're going to be 6 people. And we are having, in September, during the International Week Against Nuclear Weapons, we are having a protest at our Constitutional Court, organized by our campaign, and then a bike tour to the European Court in Strasbourg, and continue our protest there, because we really want to challenge the courts to fulfill their responsibility and to actually look at our cases and just rule about it. I mean, that's what we basically want. And we are getting a lot of support right now. For example, John Burrow from the International Lawyer Committee or Italiana, they also say clearly that this is in violation of the NPT, and why this is against international law that nuclear sharing exists. Yeah, that's basically, and I think it's also a crucial question right now, where actually Russia is escalating further by doing the same things now in Belarus by deploying nuclear weapons in Belarus and claiming, okay, you know, this is nuclear sharing. This is actually, that would be legal, and it would be legal because, yeah, NATO countries like us and the US, they are claiming their nuclear sharing is legal. And in both ways, it is illegal, and we have to find a way to de-escalate it. I guess you already have talked a lot about the modernization which is taking place, and I finish it here and hope you have some questions.
Thank you, Marion. Yes, maybe you missed at the beginning. We were saying we are going to open the floor for questions at the end. So for all the people here with us in Vienna, and also for the online participants, you can also write the questions in the chat, and we're going to read that afterwards. Thank you for your contribution. Yes, so we are going to turn now to Tom, I think, for the concluding speech. And Tom Unterrainer is chair of CND, the campaign of nuclear disarmament based in the UK, and also an active in Nottingham and East Midlands of CND, and he's the director and works of the Bertrand Russell Foundation. So thank you very much for being with us today. And yeah, I give you the mic. Yeah.
Thank you. Can we just check with the people on Zoom that they can, the audio is okay? There have been a few messages. So can people on Zoom hear now? I think it was Maria, particularly. I think I'll begin. So thank you very much. I'm very proud indeed to be the chair, the elected chair of the campaign for nuclear disarmament in the United Kingdom. And everything that I'm going to say comes and rises from the fact that CND is a membership organisation, a democratic membership organisation of activists across England, Wales and Scotland who are determined to rid the United Kingdom of nuclear weapons. Of all the things that were said in the session this morning, apart from the moment or the speech that Alain referred to, the other comment that struck me, amongst kind of a lot of impenetrable and slightly hypocritical words, I would say, something in particular struck me, and that was when Izumi Nakamitsu, the UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, warned of an arms control regime that is crumbling when there is nothing to replace it. An arms control regime that is crumbling. Now, I'm not sure that it's simply just crumbling. I'm not sure things just crumble by themselves. Usually another force or something is acting upon them, which causes that crumbling. And I'm going to go somewhere, I hope, to describing the contribution of the United Kingdom and its close ally, the United States, to that crumbling. And in doing so, I hope I'll illustrate why moves from the non-nuclear armed states to create the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons were so important and can be explained by some of this, and why it's extremely important indeed that we don't just have events like the NPT, seminars and conferences, but that we build active, creative and confident peace disarmament movement across Europe and across the world. And I want to start with a fairly recent development, and that's the potential return of US nuclear bombs to the United Kingdom. Now, this move was announced without fanfare, and more importantly, without any discussion, debate, or deliberation, or the opportunity for dissent within Britain's democratic so-called institutions. There were no official announcements
from the British government, no ministerial statements from Parliament, no press conference with representatives of the US Department for Defense. There wasn't even a distinct, detailed press release from the US Department of Defense itself announcing potential. And when the British government was asked about its likely development, it gave the following non-reply. A representative, a junior minister in the Conservative government said, the government is unable to comment on US spending decisions and capabilities, which are a matter for the US. It remains long-standing policy to neither confirm, you've heard this phrase from Ludo earlier, neither confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons at a given location. Now, news of this development only emerged after Hans Christensen, familiar with, from the Federation of American Scientists, noticed the addition of the United Kingdom to the list of nuclear storage sites to be upgraded under NATO's $384 billion infrastructure investment program. In the 2022 US Department of Defense budget, storage sites in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey were listed. In the 2023 budget statement, the UK was added to the list. Now, nuclear developments, as we know, have almost always operated under a veil of secrecy. For instance, Britain's own atomic program was conducted in secret, with not even the then cabinet being notified. More recently, the government announced in its integrated review that it would no longer give public figures for our operational stockpile, deployed warhead, or deployed missile numbers. It seems to be a clear infringement, to say the least, of the NPT commitment to transparency. Secrecy, or the lack of transparency, extends to the arrangements on which the United States stations nuclear bomb elsewhere in Europe. When asked directly about the possibility of further nuclear weapons coming to Europe under NATO auspices, NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg said, this was in December 2021, we, the royal we, as in NATO, we have no plan of stationing any nuclear weapon in any other country than we already have these nuclear weapons as part of our deterrence, and that have been there for many years. Now, unscramble that. Stoltenberg's comments have been interpreted as meaning that although Lakenheath's nuclear storage facilities are to be updated, Lakenheath is a air base south east of England. Although these facilities are to be updated, stationing of US nuclear bombs has been ruled out. I don't think this makes very much sense at all. I'd interpret Stoltenberg's comments another way. Throughout, is speaking of the head of NATO. When he says we and our, he's talking about the nuclear-armed alliance. In this context, it's worth noting that the UK's nuclear weapons program capabilities are counted as part of NATO's overall nuclear capabilities and have been many years. They're in the count. So this response from Stoltenberg is typical of the prevalence of places when it comes to the question. Now, the Lakenheath base has a history of US nuclear weapons. It was the place where the US Air Force previously stored nuclear gravity bombs. By the early 2000s, 110 US B-61 bombs were stored there, and US F-15E aircraft stationed there for the purpose of dropping these bombs on the command of the President of the United States. Unlike in Belgium, Germany, and Italy, where it is Belgium and Holland, where it is their air forces and their personnel who operate these bombs and sharing. In Britain, it is a US Air Force base, US aircraft, it is US pilots that are tasked with their delivery. Now, these bombs were removed again without fanfare in the later 2000s. And it was only in 2008 that their total was confirmed. Now, for the first time at this point since 1954, before, the United States did not store nuclear bombs in the UK. It had already been announced that Lakenheath would become the first location in Europe for the new US Air Force nuclear-capable F-35 fighter bombs. These arrived in December 2021. 24 of them were initially stationed, and others have joined them. And they're scheduled to commence, or have already commenced, training for the use of the new generation of guided bombs. 12. According to Hans Christensen, these bombs look set for shipping to Europe at some point soon, where they will replace the older generation of bombs that are already stationed. So it looks almost certain that the US intends to station nuclear bombs in the UK again. Why else have the plane designed to carry these bombs been deployed to Lakenheath, not to carry the bombs that are stored at Lakenheath? This is a major negative development, and one that should be taken very seriously indeed, both because of the wider implications and because of the fact that both the UK and the US, nuclear-armed states that we assume are working in conjunction on deployment, should be bound by the NPT, thing we're all here today and over the next few days to discuss. Even without the massively increased tensions that have been developing over the past couple of years, which have become even more acute over the last 12 months or so, our opposition is sharp. The US has an extensive military presence in England at some 17 locations, 5 bases, drone bases, monitoring stations, USAF, US Air Force, Lakenheath, the prime area. Taken all together, we can see what the special relationship, much vaunted by the British, actually amounts to. We know that even in the most stable of times, increasing the US's nuclear footprint would create instability. That's what's happening. The US is increasing nuclear footprint, and we're not living through the most stable times. We know that regardless of other circumstances, a nuclear storage site and an airbase for nuclear-capable bombers becomes a target for potential strike. We know that every new nuclear development brings with it new risks, new dangers, and new threats in the local, regional, national, and international context. But the prospect of the deployment of US nuclear bombs at Lakenheath is not the only nuclear development of concern. The UK claims to maintain an independent nuclear capability. Independent nuclear capability. It's no such thing. It relies on US technology, guidance design, and it relies on US cooperation, not an independent nuclear capability. The Johnson government's integrated review, already mentioned, announced 2 things of special note. Plans to increase the warhead stockpile, nuclear warhead stockpile, from 195 to 260 warheads, a clear contravention, and to reduce nuclear transparency, another explicit against. The PND, my organisation, formally raised both these developments prior to the last NPT PrepCom. Was the UK held to account in any way, shape, or form? No. Will the UK, USA, and Australia be held to account this event at the forthcoming review conference for their new military alliance, AUKUS, which is set to facilitate the transfer of weapons-grade nuclear material, supposedly non-nuclear Australia, in the form of nuclear reactors aboard attack submarines? Quite apart from the question of who or what these new attack submarines are supposed to attack and the destabilizing implications that go along with it, is the fact that the nuclear technology for military purposes, the fact is that nuclear technology for military purposes is now spreading. With the spread of nuclear technology comes the spread of danger and the spread of nuclear waste. Under the AUKUS agreement, Australia is responsible for processing and storing any nuclear waste. In what way are such developments in line with the NPT? They're clearly not in line with a policy. global tension. And none of the developments can be separated from the global picture. They cannot be separated from US priorities, and they cannot be separated from NATO's posture. They relate directly to the broader dynamics of European remilitarization and the so-called tilt to Asia instigated by the Obama. I'll cut it short and finish it. It's our responsibility, my responsibility, DMD's responsibility, and the responsibility of the wider peace to sound the alarm on these developments and to mobilize with energy, determination, and creativity to halt the spiral towards disaster. That's where we're at.
Thank you very much, Tom, for these also very inspiring last words. I guess, yeah. I think now we can open the floor to questions from our participants. Yes, please. I just suggest if you can certainly also present yourself before asking the question, so we know who you are, and then yeah, go ahead.
My name is Kari Kronberg, and I'm working with the Nuke at SIP and also the health university. But my question is, at the chair of the Finland has just joined NATO, and we have legislation in Finland in location weapons Finland, but it's great, first of all, that our government is law, but secondly also there are negotiations between Finland, the government, and the US. We are not related to NATO or are related in a way to NATO, but they are negotiated what are the rights of the US in its territory. And I'm also the chair now of the Finnish NPO NATO committee. We want to have open in the debate, and NATO members almost outside. So any debate, so that what about in where a nuclear umbrella state are the open bilateral about territory.
Yeah, I think you're talking about what done in history. It's the status of forces. They are kept. So what happened in Belgium? Just to give you an example, what happened in Belgium was this. I'm going back years ago, before nuclear weapons have been deployed. I'm talking about the period beginning of the 60s. There was a debate in Parliament that there should be an agreement with the United States as a member, as part of the NATO, to have a free passage of troops and munitions, they call it, and arms and munitions, through each of the NATO countries. So what the United States would like to have done that time was we need an agreement that we can freely go and station and also use the territory of Belgium for the replacement of the US with its defense. And so there was a question in Parliament, just to give you, it's an anecdotic question that we found out recently. There was a question of one of the parliamentarians who wanted, and it was like just a law. They created a law with one article to give to a law troops of NATO the passage and eventually stationing of this in Belgium. One article, that's only, and there was a senator, he wanted to add a second one to exclude nuclear munitions from that. Or nuclear, they called it nuclear munitions at the time. And then government answered, no, that this won't be the case. And he was like, he retreated his proposal. And then after that, so actually with this law, they gave the authority to the Belgian government to define, and this is the status of forces agreement, to define what it means. And apparently by accident, they took nuclear munition with them and they stored it in Kleine Brogen, now a known nuclear base. Not officially, but we know it's. And so this one, and we know it because now in the archives we saw that it was on the governmental table that they liked Parliament, that nuclear munition want under force agreement. So you never know. But I think what will happen now with Finland is in its position. Now it's like on the front line, if you want, with Russia, that they want such a kind of agreement, and it's a large agreement which is kept secret or will be kept secret, and you don't know if nuclear arms is part of it. No, but I think the way they try, or they would like to have this agreement, is like with no excuse. No, it means that eventually, if needed, I don't think it will happen now in short time, but if needed, that we also deployment of weapons. As just give another example, Poland, for example, openly said if needed, we can put nuclear weapons on our territory. This is not the case, but it's a possibility, and in that way, it is a possibility that won't be democratically stated. So you won't know it. You will know it like the way Tom explained. You know, it will be somewhere hidden in a footnote, and then and you ask a parliamentarian question, and they will answer the same way. We confirm nor deny. This is the answer they give everywhere. It's like a standard phrase in Italy, in Germany. I think it's the same way they answer all the.
Slightly different perspective in answer the question, the military and political one, which I think reveals something about the character of NATO and it's a military alliance. And the question, and the point is, who is actually in charge of NATO military operation? When it comes to crunch, when NATO stages an operation, from which country is the general sits in in the NATO office in Brussels? Where are they from? Who? The United States. Who is the military command? The United States. Which means basically in any given situation, military operation, not the Finnish people or the Finnish Parliament that gets to decide. It will be whichever US general is running NATO military operation at the time, and that can't be acceptable. And I think it's those sorts of questions that raise and ask. There's no guarantee.
Thank you both for your answers. I hope that was enough, or
Not enough, because
I saw you are skeptical. Please.
just a little comment. I think the umbrella secure to get together all the movements, the umbrella things, get together and find out pressure within NATO in order to make these questions answered. Okay, we'll come back. Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Organization. And just because I didn't know where this matter, I didn't know that the boss of the going to be. I want to say they come from the Middle East, talking about nuclear weapons in the Middle East. In the first few years, I used to come to the NPT. Most of the panels on the Middle East only had for them talking about the Middle East. So let's give a tiny panel of brown people talking about Europe. And such a good thing. One of the things that we felt the Middle East was that I don't know if you know about the draft process done. The idea was we met what the don't actually wanted, and once we mentioned only that, all the details, because at the debate all technical. But one of the things that not was the planning. So sharing is caring, that doesn't work anymore, because basically I know that in the week, it's not the same, but when Russia is using weapons to levels, it's more or less like the US weapons to Europe. But everybody is scared when Russia is doing it. In language-wise, it sounds so responsible when the US is doing it. But as you indicated, it's not responsible at all. And if the question was why society all work together on that, first change the language. It's not okay to have US weapons on your side. Well, I'm not talking about France and Britain. What are they looking for?
I'm the Iranian organization MRTA. Listening to I'm kind of close to the Israeli. Listening to the idea of the nuclear umbrella ship and not caring, and knowing about those 5 countries come from the democracy flourishing, if you imagine. But I would imagine that in Europe, you have actually a legal, judicial, parliamentary, maybe even society opinion could matter to some extent. Sciences Po had a fantastic polling about years ago about questions of nuclear weapons in society across Europe, and on majority of those countries, people don't want to. However, when I speak to my colleagues or in Belgium or elsewhere, I have no idea that the US are sitting on their soil. So I think one thing that could be quite useful, what we have in our work, is to have a technical, scientific fact on how to do something about these weapons in our country. Number 2, a legal track, yes, national level, at the level or international level, that brings attention to the issue that this is undemocratic, made by these governments, actually house these weapons on the soil, and the system actually has no happen. Once we put this technical legal table, of course, the third most important pillar is the awareness, especially. And here, I think our youth colleagues failed able to create that urgency in those 5 countries, and we, as a whole, to be able to push the political agenda, bring file higher on the radar of their representatives at the parliament or government, have major issues in the society in which anywhere in the realm of power. And yet we have. So we don't see the reason why Europeans are sitting on their and not doing. So if you need some help, we're more than happy to get on our tactics. And we look forward in Europe that is from these weapons, 5 countries. That's the starting point.
Thank you, Sharon and Ahmad, for your perspective. I'm very happy that you joined us here today. I don't know if you have some comments. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to invite you to advise us. Maybe it would be a good idea. As you know, I talked about in the 80s there was a huge move. And this was, of course, the nuclear bombs already have been there. As I said, most nuclear sharing countries, the nuclear bombs, the B-61 bombs, they were deployed like in the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s in Belgium. So, but nobody was talking about it. And it was only when there was the announcement of deploying missiles, nuclear missiles, SS-20 in the Soviet Union at that time, and the answer of NATO was to deploy cruise missiles and Pershing II missiles. And this was something like a shock. This was an open something. it was an open debate. And suddenly, you know, it was a new development announced. And this somehow created a movement because it was open, it was transparent. Journalists talked about it, and the more the journalists talked about it, politicians were talking about it, and so it was kind of escalating, creating this movement. Unfortunately, these missiles came anyhow, but as you know, it helped because a few years later, the INF Treaty has been agreed, and this was thanks, I think, also to the movement and the pressure from the states. And now, you know, with these bombs that are in the sharing countries, I can just say my frustration is it's very difficult to mobilize. It's very difficult to have it in the press. You know, we did actions. 2 years ago, we created a small network, Nuke Free Europe, with you can receive the website. If you go on it, you can find it. You'll see it's not very always updated, but it's a small movement to say. But we try to have these kind of actions, similar actions in all the sharing countries, connect each other to each other. And we had a few hundred of people going to the base and doing actions, but it's only a few hundred people. And it's because you have been, you know, and especially now in this circumstance, peace movement, as you know, on Ukraine is not really like someone not really present in the press. It's not a voice they would like to hear or something like that. And it's the same for nuclear arms. And even with the B6112, and this is my astonishment, no, it's a new development. And it's so difficult to have it in the press. There are some parliamentarians that try to question on it, and government is like, always the same sentence. We neither confirm nor deny, and it's finished. And so the fact that there is no open debate, there is no transparency, I think, is also blocking this public awareness. And to finish, what you said is true. If you look to the surveys that have been done, I think only 2 years ago, Belgium, for example, 78% of the population was for a ban. I think in Italy it was 87%, in Spain 89%, the Netherlands 78 or 79, in Denmark the same. You know, the majority of people in Europe wants to get rid of those weapons, and it's pre-wartime. I don't know how people will answer, you know, with the current situation, but at least there is a. And so the challenge for the peace movement is, of course, to mobilize this sentiment, to mobilize this majority, but it's different. And I would like to invite you to give us advice and maybe to increase mobilization and participants in our action.
Yes, not only in the countries without atomic weapons, without own atomic weapons, it's the lack of transparency very big. France, nuclear power, as you know, but the nuclear policy is almost free. There is no debate in the French Parliament. During 40 years, no debate about nuclear armament. The only one was a general debate about nuclear weapons in the world. And compared to US and to Russia, of course, it was nothing, the French nuclear arms. The parliamentarians have no power in France. Why? Because the president of the republic is the head of the army. That's why. And because our constitution has been written from a General de Gaulle on his time, and the head of state had a very big power in military issues without authorization or without control of the parliament. The president can declare the war, can decide military intervention without authorization of the parliament. In Germany, for example, the Bundestag has to allow it. But in France, only after 6 months that the parliament must consent. After 6 over intervention. Yes, and the lack of transparency is a very big issue, not only in our neighbor country, but also in the nuclear program.
Thank you for those comments. I mean, one of the things that always strikes me is that yes, we're sat in a country, a nuclear weapons-free zone at the moment. Austria is one of all too few on the continent of Europe. But the fact of the matter is the concept of nuclear weapons-free zones emerged in Europe, but it's the only continent on the planet that doesn't have nuclear weapons-free zones or real drives towards creating nuclear zones in the here and now. And one of the questions is, why is that? I mean, I think the history, post-war history, kind of goes some way to explaining that sad reality. But the question really is, what do we do now? I think, I like Sharon's idea, and I think it's something we talked about before. That if you were to have a framework for a nuclear weapons-free zone in Europe, what would it look like? What would it say? Who could we get to back it? And I think we're people with experience producing draft to what we do for Europe. But that doesn't mean that we've got some. That doesn't mean all of our challenges, all of our problems go away. I mean, the development of Russian deployment of nuclear or potential deployment of nuclear weapons to Belarus is a big danger, a big step back. But I want to try and kind of contextualize that move in stuff that was happening in Germany and stuff that Poland was saying just a few years ago, because the move to send Russian nuclear weapons back into Belarus didn't just spring out of nowhere, didn't just arise following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's a process that's been at work for some time. If you can imagine it, prior to the last, and the Germans were clearly, prior to the last general election, there was a live debate and discussion about the future of nuclear sharing and stationing US bombs in Germany. The SDP faction leader in the Bundestag made a speech declaring it's time we discuss it, time we think about it. There were similar calls and moves in the political domain from elsewhere. What was the reaction of the US ambassador to Poland? What was the reaction of a repeated reaction of the Polish Prime Minister? The hint of this discussion. Well, if Germany gets bring to Poland, even closer, bordering Belarus. And the constitutional referendum in Belarus, whatever you make of democratic or not process, that didn't just, didn't emerge 2 days before the Russian invasion when the results were announced. There was a long lead-up process in the clause of the Belarusian constitution, and I think it stems from threats which were already underway following collapse of the INF to further expand US nuclear security in Europe and move nuclear weapons closer to Belarus than Russian border. I think that was part of it. So there's a big power dynamic going on here, but I think we can help and use start by stepping back from that and imagining what would such a framework weapons look at, and I hope we put together.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, please go ahead. Yes, I had to go out because of some press things, but I want to take up the wording that both of you mentioned. I think that the wording, we have to always our demand to make our demands positive. Positive wording of our demand, non-nuclear alliance is must be non-alliance, and it has to be a democratic. And there's no democratic we are talking always, we are complaining about secrecy. And should in following weeks have some sort of a positive verdict. What we all together demand in and Poland cannot be bad, but cannot change so far. But we have Western European countries, also Northern Europe. We have very similar ideas. Positive verdict. What our demands are non-NATO and democracy have to admit have to decide on that. So we can see and say what's on all of our Yeah, thank you for your comment. Are there other questions? Yeah, please.
There's been quite a bit of chat about equality and democracy and obfuscation. And I come from Scotland, so we experience all of those things in statehood, really. I'm here for the first time as a representative of an organisation called Secure Scotland. And what we're particularly doing is trying to explore something about the language that's around all of this stuff. But I've been a campaigner for nuclear disarmament for a very long time with Scottish, with private vouchers and direct action, and most recently also working with the action. So what I would like to just reiterate, in case there are people here who still don't know this, but all of the UK's nuclear weapons are in Scotland. They're in the country that I live in. And they are there in absolute affront to the views of the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, the Scottish local authorities, the Scottish people. And even if we, as we have every single Scottish parliamentarian in the UK government voting against the nuclear weapons or the UK's nuclear weapons policy, we can't change it. And yet we have all of these weapons there. So it's a very direct and painful experience that we have. So in terms of obfuscation of democracy and lack of democracy, very why when Sharon was getting going on NATO, we were very sympathetic in Scotland. In actual fact, the Scottish Parliament helped to arrange some behind closed doors to get the thing going in the first place. So, and I would also say that over the last couple of years, we've been working very closely with Irish parliamentarians. And so that's where to start. When you look at the record that the very progressive record that the Irish government and Irish diplomatic services had on this and other wider related issues like explosive weapons in populated areas and cyber stuff and all of that, really trying to focus on building a nuclear weapons ideology with the involvement of the Irish. I'll tell you, we had, when Ireland ratified the treaty, we had a visitor, one of the TVs that came to the Scottish Parliament and spoke about it, and one of our parliamentarians, one of the Scottish parliamentarians said, I've just realised that you got this unanimously. How on earth did you get it unanimously? And the side that you got was, it's nuclear weapons, it's a no-brainer. And that is the view that is held widely by the majority of people, not just in Europe, but around the world. And if we don't wake up to that and reclaim the language and start actually talking about the reality of what's happening And if we don't, I mean, within PMD and within our organization, we need to uphold the stuff that we know. It was wonderful to hear you referencing that nuclear poll. We don't hear that often enough. There's only 9 nuclear-armed states, for God's sake. And even within those 9 nuclear-armed states, they do not have a mandate for what they do. And we need to reiterate that and state that very clearly all the time, wherever we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is no, Ireland is not a member of NATO. It makes a difference because I think when NATO, I mean, yeah, of course NATO is there, and it's because of NATO we have nuclear arms in Belgium, for example. But I think it makes a huge difference because this is something that's above the heads of democracy. It's like certain topics, military topics, democracy is not working in Europe because of NATO. That's my opinion. So even if you say, Angelica, I'm very sympathetic, every time you say NATO should not be, should be a nuclear-free alliance, something like that. It's not possible. I mean, I think it's this is militarism, and it makes it difficult to to combine both. I think.
Well, but I think we people that are not aware of what we are aware of. If we propagate non-nuclear alliance NATO, then we can draw them. They will experience that democracy and NATO go together. We need to draw that to our side.
Independent Scotland, the treaty, then joined NATO. That would be something.
Yeah.
How many members do we have in NATO? 28. 32.
30.
32.
Soon 22
Oh.
and Sweden is right.
Oh yes. Okay. So
Not yet. Not yet. 30 has to
32 countries are part of NATO. 5 are under the umbrella. Not all of them have weapons. All right. Oh, they are. But possession-wise, 5 of them. So they're all umbrella states, but 5 of them possess US on their territory. So that's already relatively good news, no? Oh, bases are everywhere. Okay, that we know. That we know. But I'm saying that physically, nuclear weapons of the US, 5 European countries that are part of NATO, and the umbrella covers the 32 countries. Now, if we get rid of the nukes in those 5 countries, let's just imagine with me for a minute. No, I mean, we work in the Middle East. Imagine how much we are imagining. Okay? So let's imagine from those 32, 5 countries have the nukes. We put up pressure, democratic, legal, blah, 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 blah. We get rid of those things. The nuclear umbrella can sit on ICBMs from the US or on their submarine, but not on the. So I don't think it's that far-fetched to imagine. We need to expand the realm of possibilities. No time to imagine that this will remain the same. It's going to come. Imagine a little bit wider. Let's see what happens.
Pauline, you're right. As I mentioned, Greece was one of the sharing countries, as Canada was, and UK, but it will become again nuclear sharing state. But no, it's possible that it wasn't the democratic decision. It was for, I don't know, it was the military apparatus that decided to get them away from there. Probably Turkey soon will be not anymore a nuclear sharing country because they don't trust the regime there. But it will not be a decision of the population.
Okay, yeah, I think there was a question there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask a question which that just brushed on, which is that studies show that the B-61 gravity bomb is pretty much ineffectual as a strategic deterrent, as bombing runs, large-scale bombing runs, are no longer feasible given ground surface-to-air capabilities, and that the ICBMs and the hypersonic missiles and the nuclear submarines are fully capable of handling any strike that any NATO operator were to, for whatever reason, execute. So I guess my question is, why bombs, aside from a lack of political will, why do the bombs still remain in Europe? Is it more on the side of the Americans wanting to maintain the status quo and remind everyone that we're the tough guy who has the leverage in Europe? Or is there some other factor? Or do people still think that contemporary bombing runs would still work in that eventuality?
I'm afraid they do think that. And the thing about the new V6-112 is that it can only be there for one purpose. That is as a first strike weapon. So it's an offensive weapon. So when we're told about seeing nuclear terror, the mere existence of a weapon like the V6-112 puts complete pay to that. Because of its design, it's not just a drop from above on a target. It's a steerable, highly guidable weapon of mass destruction. And it also has some sort of dialable capability, which means that they can vary the yield. This is what Trump called a usable, I'm sorry to use that language, but it's the language a usable nuclear weapon. They see the potential to use this in a battlefield situation. And it's clear from US nuclear doctrine, repeated statements from the State Department of Defense and elsewhere, they view the European landmass potential battlefields, okay, just as they did in the 1980s. They view it that same way now. And the new F-35 and this V6-1 were built one system, one design. They were built for each other. They're being deployed to that very. There are other things I want to say, but I just want to come back on that, which is why anybody else not in NATO looking at this deployment, they will have as clear a view as I do, and the US about the purpose of the weapon. They'll see these things being deployed to you. What are they going to do in reaction? And this is the deadly dangerous situation that it's a tinderbox. And that's, even without taking the big geopolitical disasters like, perhaps that's the wrong phrase, but big events like the terrible situation in Ukraine. Dangerous time. I'll come back on a more positive note in a bit, but I want to emphasize.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, especially when you talk about the new bombs that will come. What Tom is saying, because it's the only tactical weapon in the arsenal of the United States. Compared with what Russia has, been half of their arsenal is tactical, means for use on the battlefield. At the same time, I think up to now, when you look to the current B-61 gravity bombs, in my view, you're right. They were used, and that's what I said. I think the purpose was political, and it's not only military issue, but it's also a political issue. It's sharing the responsibility, sharing or collectivize the political nuclear, to make it a NATO matter. No, to share it. Imagine why Belgian pilots have to handle it. Why they don't do like they do in Turkey or soon maybe in UK. Why German planes have to do it. It's a very strange construction that US bombs, they say it's US matters, that is the Belgian pilots, the German pilots, Italian pilots that have to fly them in case of war, if they have to be used. This is, in my view, exactly because they need to share it. They need to make it, because if you look to the nuclear planning group, you see not only the sharing countries, it's all countries, except of France. That's the autonomous part of Macron. But it's to share the responsibility. It is the maneuvers. Every year in October, these TEDFOS maneuvers. The last one was in, it's in the sharing countries, was in Belgium, but it's also in Germany, because they are very close. You know, if you look at the card to the map, it is supported by non-sharing countries, like maybe Greece claims. So they help, and what they call it snowcats, and so. So it's just a way to make it political as a kind of common thing, to avoid distance like NATO and this kind of thing. So, and I think it's very important. So, and partly you're right, I think. But with the new ones, B6112s, I think they're meant in the total system, F-35s and so, as usable tactical arms. Although I don't know with the developments of air defense systems and so, if this is really usable. Depends on, yeah.
I think we have another question over there. If you can use the mic. Thank you.
As a part of carrying and also according to my research, sharing done against Article 2 and Article 2. But when I talk about American expert, arms control expert, there is a very interesting and popular point that suggests nuclear sharing benefit for non-proliferation regime and it sounds very effective. So my question is very simple. I want to know how to think of that real point. That's all. I want to know how do you think about that? As I just said, some American and European nuclear arms control experts, they think nuclear sharing is a benefit for non-proliferation regime with NPT as its cornerstone. It's really a field.
I mean, I'm sure President Lukashenko would say the same thing. You know, we'll have the Russian weapons rather than developing our own ones. That's the benefit of proliferation. Really, I mean, it makes no sense, does it? I think it's covered. But one of the things about the NPT in particular, which I think needs to be said, is that from its very inception, it asked much more of non-nuclear states than it did of the nuclear arms, recognizing those nuclear states, and the onus on action and activity, the prohibition that with the non-nuclear arms states. And I think that has meant nuclear arms states use the NPT in a particular way and view it as a particular way.
Sorry, I have to add some real points. Some experts think nuclear sharing is a benefit to NPT regime because it prevents some European countries from developing nuclear weapons their own on themselves, on their behalf.
But imagine you use this argument worldwide. I mean, why Russia can, in Africa, for example, can deploy nuclear arms with this argument, or in the Middle East, especially. You know, there are countries that would like to have nuclear arms. Turkey, for example, would like to have its own. Saudi Arabia, another one. Egypt even pronounced itself. So imagine this would be the policy, saying this is helpful to the non-proliferation if we put our missiles in those countries. This is, of course, absurd. I mean, it's proliferation. Nuclear sharing is part of proliferation, in my view, especially under the circumstances as they are now. I mean, you put nuclear arms on another soil. It's not a territory of the United States. Even they say the military bases are a territory. But no, of course not.
Yeah, I think we have another comment.
Just comment on this because I think it's a historical fact that after the Second World War, when the US was discussing the weapons in Europe, then Italy and Germany, who had lost the war, both wanted to have their own nuclear weapons, or wanted to have actually maybe American nuclear weapons, but not under American control, but under German and Italian control.
I don't know.
Yes, and then after the Second World War, you couldn't accept that the countries would have nuclear weapons of their own or under their control. So the US developed this argument that, which then Soviet Union thought that by just locating these arms, prevent these two warring countries of having nuclear weapons, their own. So it was actually accepted, and this background for the nuclear sharing that we are sharing Europe, but not in general. But Italy,
I mean, just one last reaction to that. I mean, and again, I'll be provocative. So these US experts made that argument. But what would they say if, and I don't believe this would ever happen, mainly because the Chinese government mind to do it. But supposing China used the same rationale for sharing with allies, nuclear weapons capability, would the United States expert interpret that move as also a non-proliferation measure? I think not. And I think the whole excuse making, and that's what it is, the whole use of that excuse by the US policy expert is revealing.
Okay, I'm wondering, are there other questions for our speakers? Yes, please.
Yeah, I just have one more, and I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much mic time, but I have a question for Rouy, which is in regards to the PNW and the statement made by Ambassador Ludo this morning in the plenary session. What are opinions on French testing in Algeria and the sort of tenuous relationship between France and Algeria? And in regard to the subject of environmental remediation and victim assistance, as per Articles 6 and 7 of the PPNW.
Was it? You quote an ambassador of what country?
The ambassador from Kiribati who spoke for Kazakhstan as well.
Yes. And I'm not sure.
Can you please ask me the question?
No.
I think it's the particular case of French testing in Algeria, the fact that consistently French governments refused to reveal where they buried nuclear material. There have been repeated demands from the Algerian government some clarity on that. I think I'm not sure how movable the French government is on that issue, but I am aware that France is a European Union state. I also understand that Austria, which is a signatory and ratifier of the European Union state, Ireland, European Union state, and therefore, apart from any domestic political pressure by the peace movement there, I think it's incumbent on PPNW ratifiers to use those states whatever political mechanisms they have. And I think it would be an interesting question. Can you get the Austrian government, the Irish government, and the Algerian government together to discuss, or how do we ask this question in Europe about these testing? Clearly, absolutely unacceptable. There is still complete lack of information about where France tested weapons in Algeria. Crazy.
Yes, it remains very big problems in the relation with Algeria and France. One of the problems, but very problem. But not only for Algeria, Algeria is now an independent state, but we have also testing zone in the Pacific Ocean and population. And there are now new government in French Polynesia, and this new government is a very progressive one, and they don't fight for independence now, but fight for reparation and recognition of the responsibility of France too. It's an issue we have to deal with, and we do it as a French.
Yeah, I think what Alain said is very important. And I see, maybe you know the case of the Marshall Islands, how we call it, the Dome, and the United States refused to take its responsibility. So it's a general attitude in refusing its responsibility in nuclear testing and the damage caused. If you look to the Hollywood film of Oppenheimer, you see not an issue in the film. The radiation and what the effects the local population they suffered after the testing. Even not in the film. It's like it's the script in the film is the real time, real life situation. The lack and the refusal of taking responsibility. I think the Marshall Islands even asked the United States to clean up the mess they made there because it's what you call it, leaking. It risks leak and spoil, all the nuclear materials of this dome that is, and the United States bluntly refused. And I think it's the general behavior. Mururoa, the French testing, a test that Hero Chirac did. And the possibility that the leak or that it will be spoiled into the ocean is very, very, because it was underground, that there are problems and they refuse.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Actually, I had a maybe last question to finish with a more positive note. And I was wondering also from my maybe youth and maybe still a little naive, even after all this point of view, where's the society here? And I was wondering if we can conclude with some positive example of what we have achieved maybe and what we could do to improve and to achieve our goal to disarmament, through disarmament as civil society and also as individuals, maybe, because I guess this is the most important thing. Yeah.
I'll go against type and try and be positive from the start. Look, the NPT itself didn't just emerge out of nowhere. The nuclear armed states didn't just grant this treaty of their own volition or voluntarily. There was sustained pressure from NGOs, anti-nuclear campaigners, think tanks, and others, which led to the development of the NPT in the first place. It was a long slog. The end result of the NPT isn't what all of us wished, but it still exists. One of the last treaties standing that includes nuclear armed states. And without the NPT, we wouldn't have had the full frontal rejection of nuclearism that's presented in the TPNW itself, the ban treaty. And what a remarkable, inspiring coming together of non-nuclear state that was. Now, of course, we have issues, we have problems to overcome, not least of which is the assembled power of the largest single military ever assembled in the history of the Earth, and the slightly lesser such military powers outside the United States, which have significantly working in Europe and around the world. But I want to go back to an important point that Janet made, and it's important not just because of the stench and stink of colonialism, in my view, the basing of the Trident weapons in Scotland, but also the vulnerability, practical vulnerability of such weapons to positive political mobilisation and action. One day, Scotland will be independent, sooner rather the sooner the better, in my opinion, for all sorts of reasons. But when that happens, where will Trident go? And a person that Janet worked very, very closely with for a number of years, John Ames, showed got nowhere to go. British files, or what's left after independence. They could try and stick some of it in Falmouth, which is a small fishing town in in Cornwall, but they'd have to knock down half the town. Or the ponds. That's why they'd have to knock down half the town. No. But that's why I said they'd have to knock down half the town. And that's not going to happen. There's nowhere these things go. So mobilisation, political action, determined effort can expose weakness, can produce real substantial political change in the favour of disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation. But our job, our business, my business, for abolition, we've got a lot of work to do, and we can only do it if we build big, vibrant peace movements where we are. We coordinate those regional levels, and most importantly, we coordinate building, fighting together, but we raise peace movements, working together on an international scale. That's what.
Yeah, short word on that. I mean, I think if you look back to the 80s, this white movement was only possible because there was involvement, the strong involvement of the trade union, for example, and other movements. And so I don't know, maybe sometimes you need a crisis to have a wake-up call. Also, those movements, we try to mobilize them. These trade unions, let's say the top of them, they are convinced that it's something else to have a real machine that mobilizes their their members and other movements. I think, for example, the climate movement, because both are planetary threats. So for me, nuclear arms and climate change both are the most important challenges for humanity and planet. So this is, I think, a challenge for us, for all of us, to convince other movements of the importance, especially if we look to Ukraine, what can be the possibility, having nuclear arms in escalation, to use this crisis really to convince them we have to be on the streets. And I think there's one very main topic we have to make, or main demand, and that's nuclear weapon-free zone in Europe. And you don't discuss about who first, and so you sign the paper, all the countries, to make Europe nuclear weapon zones with verifications and whatever mechanism. And then you have, not the discussion, then can have their nuclear arms. That's for a second step, wide away from Europe, and on the other side, but it would be a very important step towards a nuclear weapon-free world if Europe would do that. And it's possible. It's just really, really just a political will. But we, as a people, who join forces with other movements and convince them that it's a very important backline of climate change.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, what we believe in the International Peace Bureau is big coalitions with the three components: the NGOs, international NGOs like well, Nobel Prize sometimes, and like well, and that's the first component. The second one is the international institutions, like the Office for Disarmament Affairs. You heard the latest of office, a very good fighter for disarmament. And the third component is states which are willing to go forward. And we saw it with CPNW, with Austria, with Mexico, with Costa Rica, with New Zealand. I don't want to make a list of states for us, but it's and this coalition of three components can reach a lot of goals, and that's where we can
Yeah, thank you very much to our speakers, and I'm very happy to conclude with a little more positive insight, and also following up on that. IPP is going to host 2 other events during this week. One is on the 2nd of August in the morning, and we are actually going to speak exactly about the geopolitical shifting and the role of nuclear weapons in Europe. And I think we're going to speak a little more exactly about also the rising of the global south, also as a new perspective in this scenario. And the third event we are going to host on Thursday, August the 3rd, and there we are going to speak about technology, artificial intelligence, and nuclear weapons. So if you are still around, please feel free to join us there. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy our session today, and see you soon. Thank you very much.